You live alone and sometimes feel that some small daily attitudes can make all the difference in your health and well-being. Have you ever had that moment when you realized you left the hallway light off at night and tripped over something, or forgot to take your morning medication because you got distracted watching TV? They're simple things, almost invisible, but over time, they can turn into silent traps. If you're over 60 and live alone, you know that the quiet routine also hides certain risks that we only notice when something goes wrong. And the most curious thing is that many of these mistakes repeat themselves even among experienced and careful people. Think about your morning. You wake up, perhaps with sunlight filtering through the curtains, go to the kitchen, prepare your coffee with that usual care, check if the bread is fresh, turn on the radio or TV to listen to the news. Everything seems under control. But what about that medication you should have taken before coffee? It was forgotten in the cabinet again. Maybe you remembered later, maybe the next day, or you went out for a walk and forgot to lock the door. Small distractions like these are common, and many people go through them every day without realizing they're accumulating. It's normal. Living alone requires a lot of our attention. There's no one to remind us, no one to ask if we took our medication, if we turned off the stove, if we've eaten anything today. It's all up to us, and that can be liberating, but it can also be tiring. And that's where the danger lies. Over time, some habits settle in without us realizing it, and when we do, we're making mistakes that put our health and safety at risk. Not because of a lack of intelligence or experience, but simply because living alone has its own challenges. Many elderly people who live alone feel confident, and rightly so. They've lived for decades learning, overcoming. But precisely because they have gone through so much, they may underestimate certain situations. It's like when we think, that will never happen to me, or I've always done it this way and it's never been a problem. These phrases, spoken calmly, often hide a dangerous pattern. Because what worked well in your 50s doesn't always work in your 70s. The body changes, reflexes change too, and even our energy is no longer the same. This is not a reason for fear, it's just a reality that needs to be considered with care and responsibility. Some may think that talking about this is alarmist, but it's not. In fact, it's a way of caring, of reminding ourselves that we are not alone in our challenges and that there are simple and effective ways to make life safer, lighter, and more comfortable. The goal here is not to scare you, but rather to invite you to an honest and practical reflection on how we have been conducting our routine. Because sometimes a small adjustment can prevent a big problem. Living alone after 60 has its joys. The freedom to organize your own time, to choose what to do and when to do it, to be at peace with your space. But it also requires planning, attention, and above all, the willingness to keep learning. Yes, because even after so many years, there's always something to learn, and recognizing this is a sign of strength, not weakness. It is a gesture of self-love. In this video, we will talk about the 5 most common mistakes made by people living alone after the age of 60. And most importantly, we will show how each of them can be avoided with simple actions, small changes, but which make all the difference in your well-being. You will realize that you don't need major renovations or radical changes to have a safer life. Sometimes replacing the living room rug with a non-slip one or putting a nightlight in the hallway already prevents a fall. Or alternatively, creating the habit of calling a relative or neighbor once a day can prevent long periods without contact, which makes all the difference in emergencies. The idea here is that by the end of the video, you'll feel more secure, more confident, and prepared to live peacefully. It doesn't matter if you're 60, 70, 80 years old or more. What matters is knowing that it's okay to ask for help, to review your habits, and to seek information. Because living alone doesn't mean living in isolation. And taking care of yourself is also a way of taking care of those who care about you. At the end of this video, you'll discover how to avoid those silent mistakes that often go unnoticed but can cause serious harm. You'll learn how to take simple, practical steps that increase your safety, autonomy, and quality of life. You'll realize that with small changes, It's possible to continue living alone. Yes, but with more lightness, more security, and much more peace of mind. And best of all, without giving up your freedom. According to data from internationally recognized health institutions, elderly people living alone are up to 4 times more likely to suffer domestic accidents compared to those living with others. This data may seem exaggerated at first glance, but when we calmly analyze the daily lives of those living alone, it makes sense. Small distractions or forgetfulness, which would be quickly noticed or corrected in the presence of another person, can turn into serious dangers when there is no one around to help or even notice that something is wrong. A misplaced rug, an unsupported staircase, a spoiled food consumed by mistake, or even a medication taken in the wrong dose. All of these examples are more common than you might think. Recent studies indicate that a simple stumble can have devastating consequences for a person over 60. Frailer bones, slower reaction speeds, and slower recovery make falls, for example, one of the leading causes of hospitalization among the elderly. And, unfortunately, the vast majority of these accidents happen inside the home, precisely in an environment that should be the safest of all. Most alarming is that about 70% of the elderly ignore the first signs of risk, such as feeling a slight imbalance when standing up or slipping slightly in the bathroom. Many think it's normal, that it will pass, or that it's nothing serious, and so they continue with the same habits until one day, suddenly, the inevitable happens. But the problem is not limited to falls or physical accidents. Loneliness also opens the door to other threats. A survey by the World Health Organization shows that depression among the elderly living alone is twice as frequent as among those living with company. This happens because prolonged isolation, even in familiar and safe environments, can lead to a loss of mental and emotional stimuli. When there is no one to share the joys of the day, comment on a television program, or simply exchange words in the morning, the mind gradually withdraws. The constant silence becomes a heavy companion and, over time, apathy, discouragement, and loss of interest in things that once brought pleasure arise. Moreover, there is a growing risk that many prefer not to see: fraud. People over 60 who live alone are one of the main targets of financial scams. Fake phone calls, messages asking for urgent transfers, insistent door-to-door salespeople, all this is part of a worrying scenario. The lonely elderly person, often with difficulty keeping up with technological changes, may not realize they are being deceived until it is too late. And the financial loss in this case is accompanied by a painful feeling of shame and powerlessness. That's why we need to understand that this issue is much more serious than it seems. It's not just about avoiding slip-ups or remembering to turn off the lights before going to bed. It's about protecting autonomy, mental health, dignity, and, in many cases, one's own assets. The emotional impact of facing a risky situation or realizing that a simple mistake could have been avoided can be profound and long-lasting. No one wants to depend on others if they can avoid it. And that's precisely why recognizing these mistakes now is so important. Acting before the problem happens is the best way to preserve what is most precious: the freedom to live well. The cost of not acting is high. It could mean a trip to the hospital that could have been avoided, a complicated surgery due to a fracture, or a debt caused by an accidental bank transfer. But the most painful of all is the loss of independence. Once a serious accident occurs, the elderly person may be forced to leave their home, their space, their way of life, and become dependent on others. And this change is not always welcome. Many report sadness, a sense of failure, and even regret for not having taken simpler actions while there was still time. However, it is essential to say that all of this can be avoided. Yes, there are risks, but there are also paths. There are choices that can be made today, still calmly, still consciously, so that the future is lighter and safer. And this is the main point of this video, to bring to light what is often ignored out of habit or lack of information. By recognizing these common mistakes and understanding how they affect your life, you are already taking the first step toward positive change. It's not about living in fear. It's about living with wisdom, knowing that by correcting small daily attitudes, you are taking care of yourself with the same affection you have always offered to others. It is looking at yourself with responsibility and love, understanding that care has no age, and that prevention is always an act of intelligence. If you have come this far, it is because you care about your health, your safety, and your independence. And that alone already shows that you have everything you need to transform your routine. But here's something you may have never thought about. The problem is not just what you do. Often, the greatest danger lies in what you believe you already know. Because relying too much on old habits can prevent you from seeing new solutions. That's why, in the next block, we'll talk about a curious paradox that affects precisely those with more experience. How the wisdom accumulated throughout life can, in some cases, turn into a silent trap. Experience brings wisdom, but that same wisdom, incredible as it may seem, sometimes prevents us from accepting that we can still learn. This is one of the most silent and dangerous paradoxes that accompany aging. And the most curious thing is that it appears precisely in people who have lived the most, faced the most difficulties, and overcome the most obstacles throughout their lives. After all, if you've been through so much, if you've taken care of yourself and others for so many years, why would you need to change anything now? This feeling of "I already know enough" is understandable, but it can also be deceptive. How many times have you thought or heard someone say, "I've lived a lot, I know how to take care of myself"? It's a common phrase, said with pride and confidence, but it carries something dangerous behind it, because it closes the possibility of learning. It turns a truth into a prison. The person who believes they already know everything they need closes their eyes to new information, even when that information could protect them, improve them, or even save them. And that's precisely where the risk lies. Let's imagine the following situation. You've lived in the same house for over 30 years. You know every corner, every step, every creak in the floorboards. This gives you a sense of security. But over time, your body has changed. Your reflexes are no longer the same. Your balance is a bit different. Your vision might not be as sharp, and your leg strength isn't what it used to be. However, because you know every inch of the house, you don't see the need to change anything. You don't remove the rug in the hallway. You don't install a grab bar in the bathroom. You don't leave a nightlight on. After all, it's always been this way and nothing has ever happened. It's like crossing the street without looking both ways because you know the way. You trust your experience so much that you forget the world around you is constantly changing, and so is your body. Experience can be a great ally, but it can also create a false sense of security. And what's most treacherous is that this sense of security often comes accompanied by a resistance to change. The person thinks, "I don't need that. That's for people who are worse off than me. I can still handle everything." And so they neglect small warning signs that could prevent major problems. Take Mrs. Lucia, for example. She's 74 years old and has always been an active, independent, and energetic woman. She's been living alone for over a decade and takes pride in taking care of everything without help. One day, she slipped on the living room rug and fell. Nothing serious, fortunately, but the most striking thing was what she said afterward. "I always said that rug was safe. I used it for 20 years, and it never bothered me." And even after the fall, she was still reluctant to remove it. Because to her, the fall was an accident, a one-off event. Not a sign that it might be time to review certain habits. This kind of resistance isn't stubbornness, as some might think. It's a natural reflex for someone who has spent their life relying on themselves. It is the result of years of making decisions, solving problems, facing life with courage. And now, accepting that you may need to change something, that you may need help, can sound like weakness. But it is not. Quite the opposite. Recognizing that there is still something to learn, that it is still possible to improve, is one of the greatest signs of intelligence that someone can have. Studies in the psychology of aging show that so-called cognitive rigidity tends to increase with age. This means that, over time, many people become less likely to accept new ideas or change old behaviors. And this does not happen because they are less capable, but because unconsciously they believe they have already made all the changes they needed. This is the paradox of wisdom. The more we know, the harder it becomes to admit that we do not know everything. But what if I told you that recognizing this paradox is the first step to living with even more wisdom? That true strength lies precisely in keeping an open mind, in continuing to learn, in allowing yourself to evolve even after 60, 70, or 80 years. Because life does not stop, and each phase of it requires different care. What brought you here was important, but it may not be enough to take you forward with the security and peace you deserve. There is hope in that. There is freedom. Because when you realize that you can adjust your routine, review your habits, learn new ways to protect yourself, you gain power. Power over your own life, over your well-being, over your independence. You don't need to change who you are. You just need to update the path you chose to continue living with dignity. Imagine for a moment that each old habit is like a very comfortable piece of clothing, but already worn out. You can continue wearing it, of course. But if you choose to change to something more suitable for today's weather, you will feel lighter, safer, more protected. True wisdom lies in knowing when to maintain and when to renew. And this renewal does not mean losing identity. It means preserving what is essential in you. It's normal to feel some resistance when hearing this. After all, no one likes to think they're doing something wrong, but that's not the point. The point is that all of us at any age have something new to learn, and sometimes a simple piece of information can prevent a huge headache. Like knowing that there are motion sensors that automatically light up the path at night, or that there are bracelets with an emergency button that connect with family members, or even apps that remind you to take your medications with a clear, friendly voice. They're just details, but they can make all the difference, and it all starts with a willingness to listen, to consider, to reflect. When we talk about safety, autonomy, and well-being in old age, we're not talking about restrictions. We're talking about conscious choices. About deciding to live with more tranquility, fewer risks, and more freedom to enjoy what really matters. Because no one wants to spend all day worrying. What everyone wants is to live with more lightness, more joy, more confidence. We live in a culture that values independence in an almost absolute way. From an early age, we're taught that being strong means not depending on anyone, that asking for help is a sign of weakness, and that autonomy means being able to handle everything alone. These values have been passed down from generation to generation, especially to those who are now in their old age. Men and women who faced difficult times, raised children, worked hard, and are rightfully proud of everything they built through effort and sacrifice. But what happens when those same values, which once helped overcome so many challenges, start to prevent the necessary adaptations to live well in this new phase of life? This is one of the central points for understanding the roots of the mistakes that so many elderly people make when living alone. There is a deep and often silent resistance to the idea that something needs to change. And this resistance is not born out of ignorance or carelessness. It is born, in fact, from a legitimate feeling. The desire to maintain dignity, autonomy, and control over one's own life. But in the name of this desire, many end up hiding their difficulties, ignoring signs from the body and mind, and refusing simple changes that could prevent major problems. There is also an invisible pressure which few people comment on, but which weighs heavily. It is the fear of appearing fragile, the fear that by admitting some limitation, one loses the respect of children, friends, neighbors. How many elderly people avoid using a cane out of shame? How many avoid commenting that they are having difficulty climbing stairs or that they have already forgotten to take medication? This happens all the time, and often the person suffers in silence because they feel that by asking for help, they are giving up a part of their freedom. This fear is understandable, but can have serious consequences. Phrases like, "I don't need anyone," "I've always done it this way," or "I've never had a problem with that," are often heard among those over 60. They are said with firmness, with pride, with that feeling of accumulated experience. But often, they reflect more of a defense mechanism than a secure reality. It's as if, by repeating these phrases, the person is trying to convince themselves that everything is fine, even when they know, deep down, that something is no longer as easy as it used to be. This type of thinking is natural. It's the mind trying to preserve self-esteem, trying to avoid the discomfort of admitting that life has changed. But it can also be dangerous, because it prevents us from acting in time. The psychology of aging has studied this phenomenon closely. Research indicates that after the age of 60, many individuals develop what experts call adaptive denial. It is an unconscious process that minimizes signs of fragility to preserve one's sense of identity and control. In other words, the person prefers to believe they are still in control of everything rather than acknowledge the need to make adjustments. This is not a character flaw. It is an emotional instinct, an attempt to maintain self-esteem intact. But if this instinct is not understood and approached with kindness, it can prevent life-saving changes. These roots are not only in the individual mind, they are also fueled by our society. The current culture excessively values youth, performance, the appearance of strength and independence, the beauty of aging with wisdom, the strength that exists in knowing how to ask for help, and the intelligence of adapting are rarely discussed. As a result, many elderly people feel pressured to prove that they are still strong, useful, capable, even when deep down they feel they need support. This silent demand weighs heavily, and it causes many to hide their difficulties until an accident or crisis reveals the truth. Additionally, there is the factor of habits. Everything we do for a long time becomes an automatic pattern. If a person has spent a lifetime sleeping in total darkness, it is difficult to convince them that a small nightlight in the hallway could be a good idea. If they have always enjoyed keeping plush rugs in the living room, it is complicated to suggest that it might be time to replace them with safer options. Old habits intertwine with memories, personal tastes, and feelings of comfort. And asking someone to give up on that, even for safety reasons, requires care, understanding, and above all, respect. But understanding these roots is liberating. When we recognize that many of the mistakes we make don't come from ignorance, but rather from old beliefs, invisible pressures, and ingrained habits, we can look at ourselves with more compassion. And it is precisely this gentle and understanding gaze that opens space for change. Because no one likes to be corrected, but everyone likes to be understood. And when someone understands the reasons behind their behaviors, it's easier to accept new paths. It's important to reinforce that this is not about throwing away everything you've built. On the contrary, it's about using your wisdom to continue growing. Life after 60 can indeed be one of the fullest and freest phases, as long as you're willing to question, adjust, and evolve. Small gestures such as accepting that you need help to do some shopping, installing a handrail in the bathroom, or maintaining daily contact with someone you trust do not diminish your independence. They strengthen it, because they prevent situations that could otherwise take away the freedom you value so much. We've come this far by deepening our understanding of the common mistakes many make when living alone in old age. And now we know that these mistakes often have emotional, cultural, and psychological roots. We know there is a silent fear of appearing fragile, thought patterns that hold us back. And society still needs to learn to value aging with more wisdom and empathy. But the good news is that all of this can be transformed. From the moment you understand where these patterns come from, it becomes possible to break them. And that's where real change begins. because recognizing the causes is the first step toward transformation. In the next block, we'll start looking ahead. We're going to shift our perspective. The time has come to discover that there is another way to live this phase of life. Lighter, safer, and with even more autonomy. Is there a risk to all of this? Yes, there are risks. We've already spoken about them, frankly. But now it's time to take a step forward and see the other side of this story. Because there is also tremendous power in small changes. The good news is that you are in control. By recognizing the patterns that have led you to certain habits, by understanding that many of these behaviors have deep emotional and cultural roots, you have already initiated a movement of transformation. And this movement, even if it starts with a simple thought, has the ability to change everything. True wisdom lies in adapting. This is the central point of the perspective shift. For a long time, we have learned that keeping things as they have always been is a sign of firmness. But in reality, adapting is a sign of intelligence. It is a sign of flexibility, of emotional maturity, of sensitivity to the natural changes of life. And there is nothing wrong with changing. On the contrary, changing is proof that you are attentive to your own reality, willing to improve, to live with more lightness and security. It is not weakness, it is strength. It is not giving up, it is self-care. Many people fear this word, change. But when it is accompanied by respect, awareness, and purpose, it becomes an ally. From now on, the focus is no longer solely on the problem. We have already understood why mistakes happen. We have already discussed the traps of experience, the silent denial, the repeated habits, and the fears that prevent us from asking for help. Now, it's time to look forward, because there is indeed a path that respects your autonomy, preserves your dignity, and increases your security. And this path begins with simple decisions that can be made today. The story of your Jose is a clear example of this. At 76 years old, he has always been an active man, one of those who wake up early, take care of the yard, shop at the neighborhood market, and even sweep the sidewalk. He lived alone since his wife passed away and always said he didn't need anyone. Proud of his independence, he ignored his daughter's warnings, who asked him to put a support in the bathroom or a lamp in the hallway. Until one night, when he got up in the dark, he slipped on the living room rug and fell. He broke his femur. He underwent surgery, physical therapy, and months of recovery. The physical pain was great, but the emotional pain was even greater. He felt vulnerable, ashamed. He told his daughter in the hospital, "I thought I'd never need this, but I did." After this episode, something changed in his Jose. With the help of his family, he reorganized the house. He removed the rugs, installed support bars, left motion sensor lamps in the hallways. He created a routine of calls with his children and, over time, learned to use a cell phone with an emergency button. And most impressively, he began to feel more independent than before. Because now he knew that if something happened, he could ask for help. Today, Jose says he didn't give up his freedom. He just found a new way to live it. The key is to anticipate, not remedy. Waiting for something bad to happen before changing your attitude is a more painful path. Prevention is always lighter, more economical, and safer. And best of all, it can be done gradually, at your own pace, within your reality. It's not necessary to renovate the entire house overnight. Just start with small choices. Small, conscious decisions that, added together, build a more stable and protected life. This new perspective aligns with various studies on healthy aging. One of the most valued principles in modern geriatrics is precisely prevention. It's not just about treating diseases or regaining mobility. It's about preventing dangerous situations from happening through adapting the environment, building a support network, and adopting healthy habits. Research shows that elderly people who adapt their routines and homes in advance have fewer hospitalizations, lower risk of falls, and a greater sense of emotional well-being. This is not theory. This is applied science to real life. That's why, at this point in the video, we want to invite you to make a choice. It's not a radical decision. It's not a break from what you believe. It's just an openness to experience a new way of looking at your own life. With more affection, more attention, and more care for details. Because these details make a difference. And the most beautiful thing is to realize that by changing, you don't lose your identity. On the contrary, you reaffirm that you are willing to live well, with dignity, clarity, and respect for yourself. Let's start with the simplest and most effective attitudes. In the next parts of this video, you will learn what you can do now, today, to avoid the most common mistakes of those who live alone. We will show you which habits need to be adjusted, which household objects can become traps, how technology can help in a practical way, and which behaviors deserve special attention. Don't worry, it won't be complicated. Our goal here is to be clear, direct, and respectful of your life story. You don't need to change everything at once. You can start slowly with a small adjustment, a new habit, a conversation with someone you trust. And you will see that each small action opens a new door. Before you know it, you will be reaping the fruits of a safer and much lighter routine. Life doesn't need to be surrounded by risks. It can be surrounded by care. And care, when it comes from within, is even more powerful. From now on, what you will see are tools, ideas, and suggestions that have already transformed the lives of thousands of people in your age group. It's not a ready-made recipe, but a set of possibilities. You choose what makes sense, what fits your reality. The important thing is that you feel motivated to take action. Because, as we have already said, you are in control. Now that we have deeply understood the problem and taken an important turn in the way we see life after 60, the time has come to transform this new perspective into action. We will get our hands dirty with practical, accessible, and effective solutions that can be implemented today without complications and without major radical changes. The idea here is not to revolutionize everything all at once, but to take the first steps. And since every journey begins with the first step, that is exactly where we will start now. The first mistake that needs attention is one of the simplest, but also one of the most dangerous: leaving objects lying on the floor. Slippery rugs, wires from electronic devices, stacked boxes, or even that low stool you usually use as support to reach high places. All of this, even if it seems harmless, represents a real risk of falls. The solution? Organize the spaces and remove the obstacles. Take a walk through the house with a new perspective, imagining that you are visiting someone else's house. Notice every corner. What is out of place? What can be reorganized? Sometimes, just moving a piece of furniture or removing a rug can significantly reduce the risk of accidents. This simple attitude can prevent fractures, hospitalizations, and unnecessary pain. The second mistake is the lack of night lighting. During the early morning hours, many elderly people get up to go to the bathroom, drink water, or check something, and do this in the dark, out of habit or to avoid wasting energy. But the cost of a fall in the dark is infinitely greater than the electricity bill at the end of the month. The solution is simple and accessible. Use motion sensor lights. They turn on automatically as soon as they detect movement and can be installed in hallways, bathrooms, stairs, and even in bedrooms. There are also options for night lamps with sockets that emit a soft enough light not to bother, but which illuminate the path safely. Installing these lights is quick and inexpensive and can prevent one of the most common accidents among people living alone. A third very common mistake is ignoring medication alarms. The routine can be quiet, but a distraction is enough to forget the right time to take the pill. Sometimes the elderly person even remembers, but is late and then thinks, "Leave it for tomorrow." And so the treatment gets lost. This is more serious than it seems, because certain medications, especially those for continuous use, require regular schedules to ensure their effectiveness. The solution? Use simple alarms or cell phone apps. Even if the technology seems complicated at first, there are apps made especially for the elderly, with large buttons and easy-to-understand audio reminders. If using the cell phone is difficult, a watch with an alarm can serve the same function. The important thing is to create the habit of obeying the alarm, just as you obeyed the school bell or the phone at work. The fourth mistake is related to financial and personal security, trusting strangers too much over the phone. Scams involving calls pretending to be from banks, relatives, or collection companies have grown alarmingly. The scammers are persuasive, know how to emotionally involve, and often manage to obtain confidential information without the person realizing it. The solution in this case does not require technology, but rather a firm decision. Create a personal rule of never giving out information over the phone. Establish prepared phrases, such as, "I do not confirm data over the phone." If it's important, send it by letter. Or even, "I'm going to hang up and call the bank's official number directly." Over time, this attitude becomes automatic. Teach this to yourself as if it were a house rule. Thus, you protect yourself and avoid situations that could compromise your safety or your money. The fifth mistake many make when living alone is isolation from the neighborhood. In many cases, the person goes days without talking to anyone, thinking this is normal. But contact with neighbors not only serves to exchange words, it is also a security measure. Having someone nearby who knows you are well, who notices if something has changed in your routine, who can be contacted in an emergency, is essential. The solution? Establish simple weekly bonds. A good morning at the door, a brief visit, a chat at the gate, or even a note left in the mailbox. It is not necessary to create a deep friendship, but rather to build a minimal support network where one looks out for the other with small but significant gestures. These 5 initial attitudes do not require large investments, do not require professional help, and do not take much time. They are simple adjustments, directly connected to the causes we discussed in previous blocks. Lighting the way, organizing the environment, reinforcing care reminders, shielding against fraud, and staying connected with the surroundings are actions that increase your safety and peace of mind. And more than that, they are signs that you are taking the lead in your own life with awareness and responsibility. Small adjustments make a big difference. You don't need to change everything at once. Each step strengthens your autonomy and quality of life. One of the most common mistakes is social isolation, which affects health as much as physical diseases. The solution? Participating in activities, cultivating bonds, and keeping the mind active. 82-year-old Donna Selena experienced this. After a year of loneliness, she found a new meaning in her life through the reading group. Neglecting mental health is also a mistake. Sadness and discouragement are not normal in old age. Seeking psychological support improves well-being and longevity. Another mistake is refusing help out of pride. Mr. Raimundo resisted his grandson's support at the bank until he fell victim to a scam. Today, he feels safer sharing this responsibility. Furthermore, being prepared for emergencies is essential. Accessible contacts, alert bracelets, and organized medical information can save lives. Ignoring technology is also a risk. Apps assist in daily life and strengthen independence. The important thing is to take action. With small changes, your life becomes safer and more peaceful. Try the 7-day challenge, 1 mistake per day, 1 new attitude. In the end, you'll feel the difference. Taking care of yourself is an act of love and inspiration. Your story matters. Your well-being inspires. Together, we can transform lives. If this message resonated with you, don't put it off. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this content with someone you love. It could be a friend, neighbor, or family member who needs this encouragement to live with more safety and quality. Together we can learn, grow, and transform lives.